Just a couple of words then about the elephant. Over the past 3 years, the alternative has been asking the question. I don't know how many of you have been watching what we're doing. We've been asking the question, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? And one thing that became clear to us is that the current politics is part of or in service to a socio-economic system that is currently destroying our planet. And we feel that we won't be able to deliver a new politics until we have a good sense of the new system that a new politics would be part of or serving. So the elephant is the project that tries to name that new system, the thing that we don't know quite yet how to talk about. So last December, we gathered 30 people together in a room who we felt have been quite busy creating that new system. But we're not yet collaborating or integrating our work well enough to be able to say, this is it, this is the new system that our politics should be serving. Like the blind man and the elephant, each one of us can see a part of that new system, but none of us can quite see the whole thing. So this series invites each fortnight another one of these sort of partially blind men or women to come and show us their part or their perspective on the elephant, in the hope that over time and over the whole of this series, we'll be able to visualize this new system in our minds. So with that in mind, I'd like now to invite Peter. I don't know if you're all on speaker view now, but Peter, can you unmute yourself and say hi, then we can see you.
I'm now unmuted. So if I say hi, you'll be able to see just me.
Yeah, just you. Yeah, I'm just clicking off yeah, great. So Peter, do you want to, I think maybe the best thing to do, some people here will know exactly what you've been up to in Frome and others won't. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just describing what you've been doing over the past few years, and maybe think about it in terms of, yeah, what is it that you're addressing and changing?
Sure. So the reason why I'm here and why Indra invited me is because about 10 years ago in Frome, which is a market town in Somerset, over towards Bristol and Bath, a group of us got together to take over the town council in a way that was a little bit different. And the background to that was that none of us had been involved in local politics before, and all of us felt that things could be done much better. And we'd also seen austerity coming, or some of us had. So austerity was just beginning. Hard to remember now that we found that actually there is a lot of money down the back of the sofa, but at the time we were fooled into believing that there was no money down the back of the sofa and that actually we needed to do austerity. So we knew that austerity was coming. We had a lot of party political shenanigans in our town, which basically meant that a lot of time was wasted with people just arguing with each other and not doing anything. And also that nice man, Mr. Cameron, had said that he was going to introduce localism and that there would be a lot more power at our level. So we saw an opportunity to get involved, but we didn't really know what we were doing, and we certainly never set out very initially to take over running the town council. Town councils, for those of you who don't know, only have to have allotments and one meeting a year. But the potential for them to do much more is huge, particularly actually under localism. They can pass a bit of legislation which allows them to do anything which is legal. So we saw an opportunity to do stuff. And we stood, and 10 of us got elected out of 17 councillors. So we had a majority from the very start. This is in 2011. And then we tore up a lot of the rules and did things fairly differently. And the two pillars to that was, we said, this is how we as a group will work. We as a group will work with an ethos, with a set of values about how we will behave together as a group. And secondly, we will work with participatory democracy rather than representative, so that we would be constantly working with the people and looking for the wisdom that was in the town and trying to create relationships with people in the town, so that this wasn't about 17 people running Frome. It was about if, in effect, 17 people facilitating different groups and individuals within the town to do good stuff. So we did that for 4 years, and then there was another election, and then 17 independents got elected, and I was one of them again. So all 17 got elected the second time. And then I didn't stand again in the May last year. In fact, none of the original people stood again, which in itself is a bit of a precedent, because many councillors at this level stand for decades, literally. But we were very keen that there was a movement. There was a movement of people. So none of us stood again, and another 17 independents stood. And so Frome is still run in this same way. And so that's the background to why you invited me to talk, or to be here really, and be in this conversation. Because this was an attempt to do something differently, which was very much about trying to properly engage with and involve everybody within a community. You're muted, Indra.
Sorry, when you talk about it, it sounds so obvious and also so easy. You know, why didn't we just take over the council? But, you know, having spent myself, you know, decades really as part of the old politics, I know that can't have been an easy thing to do, or, you know, perhaps especially not in the mindset of people. You know, so I mean, what do you think was really, you know, the big change that you made, other than just get yourselves organized? You know, what did people think the council was?
I don't think most people did think what the council was. That's not a very good sentence, is it? But I think most people, including me, had never really thought about what a council was or might do, or even that they had one particularly. And so by making it more interesting in the election stage, in that initial election stage, by making it much more fun, we engaged far more people. About 75% more people voted in that first election. So I think it was just, yeah, it was an opportunity for people to kind of go, actually, I do want to engage with this. I do want it to be fun. I keep saying fun, don't I? But these things don't have to be nearly as heavy and as hardcore as they seem. And for us, it was actually relatively easy. I mean, a lot of people, as I say, had been there for a very long time and were very complacent. More than 60% of elections at this level are not contested. There aren't enough people to stand. You know, in the last elections, there were whole tranches of the country where there were no elections in a whole range of parishes that had to join together. Doesn't mean it's always easy, because particularly where there is an entrenched party political presence, they'll often hang on, you know, with using every trick in the book to make sure that they do so. So there are a lot of places where independents have stood in the same kind of way as Frome, tried incredibly hard, run great campaigns and not won. So it would be false to say that it was that it's always easy. But also it's true that we fell into an ecology in Frome which had been building for some time. I mean, that Frome had reached its bottom in a sense. The market town, the market had left the town, all of the major big factories had closed. It was quite a depressed place. And then into Frome came some new people. And also within Frome, there was a real desire to do stuff differently, I think. So it definitely wasn't independence for Frome that changed everything. You know, we were lucky in that sense. But there are plenty of other places where that's also true.
So if I'm hearing it right, there was a desire already because of the depression, as you're saying, that was there. But also, I think you've talked about before as well, that there was a networked sense already. There was a sort of identity in Frome, or, you know, some sort of idea that the people of Frome, you know, could come together over things. I don't know, maybe like a market. There was a market there, I think, and a festival. Are these sorts of things important conditions, do you think, for a successful bid for independents taking over the council?
Yeah, they certainly help. There was a market. No, I mean, there wasn't the large market which there is now, which was something that we were part of introducing. But there were. I don't think a market played a particularly large role. The festival probably did. The festival preceded Independence of Frome and was part of people starting to come together. And there've been lots of work on things like let schemes, exchanging. For me, it's as much about community building as about the actual exchange and the bartering. So there's been quite a lot of work on building community, I think. And also Frome has always had a lot of community organisations. And things like the carnival, actually. The carnival probably has more, I mean, the carnival has been going for decades, which is something which happens in a lot of Somerset and other parts of the country, a lot of Somerset towns. So those things are definitely there. But we were able to really build on that. So we multiplied the amount of money going back out to the voluntary sector in that very first budget. We multiplied that by 10 and employed a full-time worker to support community groups and employed somebody to be available to help fundraise. So that helped groups to get funding ready and then bring in what eventually becomes millions of pounds into the town from the lottery and other foundations, which would never come to a town council. So it's bringing money in sideways. It's recognising that funds and support were not going to come from above. That's the austerity bit. The district and the county were never going to have funds for or provide services again. So if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to happen. So we needed to grasp this and run with it as a town, or we, like many other places, would gradually die in a mess of closed toilets.
The other part of it that really kind of screams at me is the role of the citizen, right? So, what most people think of as political responsibilities, that we vote once every 5 years. That's really the only option to us. Or we can vote on council elections, obviously, but I think it's something like a 20 to 25% turnout normally. So people don't take advantage of that. So it's quite a shift, isn't it, from the old kind of politics where we only really had to think about it once every 5 years, and remembering that as a result of that kind of politics, only 2% of people are members of political parties. So we have this opportunity to vote and then to choose really between two main parties. So it's not much we have to do right now as citizens. And then to shift into this idea of politics, it sounds to me like quite a steep curve. Suddenly you're being invited to participate in something, be active in it, maybe, work on the local budget together with you. Give an example of other things that citizens have been now able to do, and maybe a little bit about how ready they are to do those sorts of things.
So my experience is that people are definitely both ready and willing and incredibly intelligent. I mean, that sounds condescending by saying it, which it wasn't meant to. What I mean is that when allowed to make decisions, people make good decisions, assuming that they've been informed. I mean, we've been through all this in the last 3 years. We kind of know that what happens if you don't give the right information. But given the right information, people do engage. So Frome's had thousands of people, literally more than 1,000 people, making a decision. I'm sorry to go on about toilets, but making a decision on what to do with the toilets in the park. Toilets are very important things. It's kind of like, these are the things that actually do affect people at this level. But to get 1,000 people to vote, to be involved in a process of deciding how to spend the money, and in that case, how to whether to raise taxes or not to pay for what they wanted, it's really important to do that. But the people really rise to that, I think. That they actually, we got and get large numbers of people coming to meetings. I suppose that's past tense now. We don't have meetings, isn't it? But so getting 70, 80 people to meetings. This is in a level of local government where getting anybody to a parish or town council meeting is an achievement. But people come and engage and are really lively and involved when they're taken seriously and listened to and acted on, I think. And that acted on is really important. So the bit that you mentioned of what we call the people's budgets rather than participatory budgeting, which is difficult to say. But so having people's budgets where people actually decide what chunks of budget is going to be spent on has been really successful, I think. And it's still growing, it's still evolving, and people are getting more used to it. But the crucial thing is that you have to go with what the people say. See what I mean? So there was an early example of that. I was dead against the council spending money on fireworks. I didn't think we should be spending money on fireworks. It's noisy, it's polluting, and so on and so on. So I would have voted against that. Definitely, it was something that the people decided upon. The people decided to spend their money on fireworks, and actually, it was a great night, and there was a fantastic involvement of different sectors of the community, and it worked really well. And I ate all my hats. And I think but the important thing is that I probably didn't have the power, but I didn't work with other councillors to undermine that decision later. I think if you give it to the people, you've got to give it to them. And we let 10-year-olds vote because we found we could. And that's because these are decisions about what's going to go on in the park, what events are going to happen in the town. So those will impact upon the lives. It will be children who will enjoy those or not. So we need their opinions. And you could kind of go to their school and have some very formal, I don't know, ask the children event with the mayor with a chain on, and it just wouldn't work. But by getting them to an event with adults where they're taking part and they're voting, great.
Yeah, and it's great training as well. Can I ask you to shift your focus a little bit then from fireworks and toilets to the environmental crisis? Because I know that Frome was one of the first towns to declare a climate emergency. And maybe could you describe a little bit of that before then moving on to within the time we've got to the coronavirus and how you've been working. But let's start first briefly, if you can, with the environmental crisis and how Frome has been maybe acting differently from other places.
Yeah, so 3 or 4 of us came into being councillors from the transition town movement in Frome. So we came with a strong desire to change stuff around the environment. And very early on, we employed a resilience manager. So somebody whose job it was to focus on projects and activities that would reduce the carbon impact in the town and help the town to be townspeople to be more prepared come climate change. And that's been very influential, and she's been very influential. She's a particularly effective woman, and she's been able to raise significant amounts of money and bring them into projects. And then I suppose it was just, so many of these things, if you don't label them as green, is part of it. I mean, Green Party, it's like, why would you not support stuff that's going to reduce pollution and allow you to deal with waste in better ways and share more stuff? And, all of these things, or so many of them, strike me as essentially common sense. A bit like what I was saying before about an ethos. It's common sense to work together rather than to spend your time stabbing each other in the back and fighting. But we have a model which we've tend to adopt, or many people adopt. So we started off with a very strong green environmental ethos, and then have maintained that, and then declared a climate emergency early. Actually, we had carbon targets before that, actually, as well as a town. We always felt that it's worth having aspirations, even if they're way, way beyond a parish council. So having zero carbon 2030 targets is still a good thing to do. Having an ethics policy, even if there are no others at a parish level, is a good thing to do. So we did a lot of stuff like that. And then coming to the whole of where we now are with Corona. Well, it's difficult to talk about without prefacing this, I think, with the fact that for many people this is an unmitigated disaster. There will be businesses all over the world now, and in Frome, for whom this is a disaster. Of course, there are lots of people for whom who have friends and family who are ill and or have died. This is a complete disaster for many people. So I feel slightly tricky talking about it as something from which there are benefits. But having had the conversation that we've just had, much of what I wanted to see happen in Frome is happening. There are more joined up things going on and more connections between different people now than there were in many ways. There are fantastic acts of generosity and kindness and togetherness as a community, and some really great creative thinking that's going on. And Annabelle, who on my screen is beneath you, so to speak, you know, knows more about this than I do in lots of ways, and can talk about it later, I'm sure. But it's, you know, there are a lot of really, really good things happening, and many of them could be a precursor to a better democracy, I think, because people are suddenly, it's not so much that they're reclaiming politics, it's just that they're claiming politics. I mean, we've never had we've never had power, I don't think. You know, we've never actually had democracy. I don't like conversations about democracy often, because they assume that we have had a situation in which we, as the people, have had democracy. We haven't. You know, the Greeks did a great job, and there are lots of really interesting indigenous people models of democracy. But beyond that, we've never had it. Now there are people who are making decisions involved with each other, together as small groups of people in their cul-de-sac, in their road, in their wherever they are, who suddenly are doing things. Now, I mean, maybe this is what we're going on to talk about, but it's like, and what happens next? You know, how, you know, whether we can keep that. But yeah, I find some of that really exciting, and some of what's going on elsewhere in the world, and some of the testing of different models of ways of people making decisions. And us, look at us, you know, we're from all over the world, sitting here with 2 pages of people, you know, engaging with each other in what I would call politics.
And I'd just like to tease out one more thing before we sort of hand it back to the more people, which is this, the question that always arises for me is that if you have a great council like yourself, you know, people can organize, and then they can, you know, try to engage with the council. But there's always limits, isn't there, to what a council can actually deliver. Is there also something arising now that we're seeing more and more of with the coronavirus, which is, you know, people's networks, where they might have to think about getting to solutions themselves, you know, so that there's almost like a partnership between themselves and the council? Have you seen, you know, rather than everything funneling straight to the council, so here we have our needs and you're going to deliver them, isn't there also now showing up some sort of new it's kind of agency where people are having to deliver as well themselves, and then working together in partnership with whatever the council can offer? Does that
Absolutely.
make sense?
Working in partnership or not. So certainly in Frome, there's a lot of stuff going on that's independent of the council.
Yeah. So
I mean, and when you talk about delivery, my own particular engagement is with exactly that. It's with a group of people who've set up a group of they started as the Three Musketeers, using bicycles to deliver pharmaceuticals from the pharmacy to people who are isolated, and that's got nothing to do. Actually, we couldn't be bothered. We looked at all the systems of volunteering and all the rest, and thought, I'm not filling in all those forms. Let's just do it. So and I think there's definitely a lot of that. And I mean, what we have, there are more volunteers than work in Frome at the moment, you know, to a large extent. And I mean, I hope that's true in many other places. And I you know, we have been not at all significantly impacted upon in the way that others have done. So that's why that's occurred. But yeah, I think that's happening now. And as we descend, if that's the right word, into a recession, that's going to be even truer. You know, people will either have to find ways to work together, you know, and share, or they won't. I mean, it'll be bringing out the best or the worst, and we'll see. But I mean, I like to think that places like Frome are going to be well equipped to do that.
That sounds great. Well, thanks very much. That's a great introduction to this part of the system, Peter. So I'd like to invite first round of questions for Peter. And what's going to happen is, if you look down at your bottom of your screen and you see the participants box, if you click on that and look to the right, you'll see that there's an opportunity to raise your hand. And Maria's going to spot who raises their hand first. And Maria, if you could unmute yourself as well, maybe tell us who's waiting to ask a question. So whoever would like to ask Peter a question, please do so.
So Sanderson, or Jones Sanderson.
Sanderson Jones. Sanderson, you want to unmute yourself?
there. Hi there, and by the way, I think in explaining how to turn off sharing participant screen, I thought I might have started sharing myself. And maybe we'll get to this at another stage. I am slightly obsessed at the moment with what happens after, he started speaking about what happens after coronavirus, and there seems to be many great initiatives like this one. And I'm just wondering if there are any that you are aware of or are part of, because that's just my current obsession and I'm asking everyone about it. So anyway, there we go. Thank you.
So am I aware of things that are going on?
In order to like there seems to be, you mentioned that sort of feeling of togetherness and this feeling of people doing local politics, and there seems to be so much hope around this in the circles that I move in. But my big worry is that like the organizations which spring up around hurricanes but disappear sort of often soon after, that those efforts will go and disappear. And so I'm just wondering whether you know or are part of any conversations on how to make sure that the politics which is being created by the corona crisis actually survives afterwards.
So the conversations that I'm involved, as are Indra, is with the Future Democracy Hub of Extinction Rebellion, who, you know, the third demand of Extinction Rebellion is for a new politics. And so for them, what I said earlier could absolutely apply. So much of what's going on now is new politics. And it's like so much of what Extinction Rebellion has wanted in relation to all three demands has suddenly arrived. And so there's a lot of thinking about how things can be maintained and built on. And in their case, also, you know, there's an issue of what does one campaign on to try and ensure that things are retained. So I mean, I would definitely engage with them if you could. The Future Democracy Hub meets all the time, and there's a Extinction Rebellion TV, which is actually not TV, but video. So there's a whole program of events every day going on. I mean, that's where I'm getting things. And I don't have any particular things that I'd want to talk about now. I mean, again, I think we might come to them more in groups and you know, shortly.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Cool. And then Paul Arnott.
Hi there, I've got a terrible microphone, so if you can't hear me, please do say and I'll give up. Can you hear me? Over?
Yes.
I can hear you. Over.
All right, thank you. Roger. I'm from a bit further south than Peter. We're in East Devon, and we're trying to do something similar to Frome, but at a town and a district level. So it's a sort of another unit of people up. So it's sort of, I don't know, 110,000 people, something like that. And we're putting together an alliance between independents, of which I'm one, but also to shore up the, I suppose, Extinction Rebellion side of things. Greens, these are all elected district councillors, by the way, and the Liberals. And I just wonder whether Peter would agree that the common foe in all of this at the moment tends to be Conservatives. And I say that because I'm guessing that would have been the case in Frome and the district. And I'm wondering if he'd agree that the problem at that level is that it's all about planning permission, a lot of money in that, and that leads the very well organised Conservatives to effectively infest the parish, town and district level, because that's the only way of controlling it. So my question is, how do you organise against that? How do you prevent a counter-revolution once you've done something like you've done in Frome, and maybe think about going up a level? How do we defend ourselves, against them coming back?
So, as I think what I'm hearing is, how do you, if you're at a community level, how do you avoid being sort of squashed by the levels above? Well, with difficulty as part of my experience. And one of the things that we did worst as Frome, I think, or one of the mistakes we made, was went to war with the district early on, without really having thought through that the powers that they still had. But in our case, the district is becoming more and more irrelevant, and I think will pretty certainly disappear soon, because they've got less and less money. And so more and more stuff is being done at these local levels. And you're close to a little microcosm of award-winning democracy with Buckfastleigh and Chudley and Dartmouth and that lot. So there are 5 towns there who've done something quite similar to Frome, and then now are working together. And I say award-winning because they won a Nestor Award the other day for progressive democracy, which is about them joining together. And so what they're doing is they're linking together to become a power, if you like, at this local level. And one of the most interesting things about this level is that you can still raise as much tax. You're not capped as a town and parish council. You can raise as much tax as you want, and so there's huge potential for this level to do more than it's already doing. So there is a risk, but I mean, I suppose that particularly planning is an issue, and that's why some people try and move up to the next level up to a district or a unitary level in order to control planning. But I also think there's an influence thing, and if there's enough towns and parishes that are working well and properly functioning, that will have an influence at the higher levels. I don't know if that's helpful, but and do talk to Pam and Pam and others. Pam is the now deputy mayor of Buckfastleigh, who's a fine woman and has been much involved in introducing others to the same sort of principles as I mentioned at the beginning of this. Where are we going?
Great. Then it's Sarah Holiday.
Hey, it's actually George sitting next to Sarah. Thanks for chatting to us. I'm interested in the idea that you kind of ran as a bunch of independents on some values, and maybe already the group of you, your values were aligned enough to kind of have a kind of, I guess, some sort of common aims. But I guess my question is more, lots of words we use to describe values such as freedom are quite empty and hollow actually when it comes to it. And they could be interpreted in sort of any way you want. So I'm just kind of wondering how you managed to run a coherent council based on some values which are, could be interpreted any way they want. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you defined them a lot more than I'm kind of saying.
In a sense, we defined them less. There's a number of things that you mentioned just there. One is that we weren't actually a group of people who came with common values originally. We certainly didn't come with common politics or party politics, so we didn't come with common ideology. And actually some of the most interesting groups that have arisen post Frome have really nice, really good mixtures. And so there's a range, including, conservatives and further right within that mix, because that's what you actually need, in my view, to have a broad spectrum, and then to have this set of ideals. I mean, the sort of things which we're just looking for them. No, that's the wrong bit. We call them our ways of working, or sort of principles. A preparedness to be swayed by the arguments of others and admitting mistakes. That kind of thing. So they weren't. One of the things that needs to be clear is that this was us as a group of independents who had these common aims. It wasn't us as a council. It gets a bit complicated when all 17 of you are the independents, but you can't inflict a desire for humour or for empathy onto councillors. But you can as a group. See what I mean? You can agree we are going to work with humour in the mix. We are going to work with empathy or with listening or understanding the difference between constructive debate and personal attacks. But you can't, see what I mean? So we could do that as a group, and the groups who've followed us and gone on to do some really interesting things, the ones that have really succeeding have a strong set of values like that. It's an idea, incidentally, pinched from, or if that's the right word, the Alternative Party in Denmark, who were very much the inspiration of the Alternative UK. And if you Google them, their values are at the top of that, which includes humour in their list. Difficult to measure, but.
I think we're going to have just one more before we go into a breakout room.
Yes, that's Sonia.
Hi, I'm coming from a context in France where, in the suburbs of Paris, where many local towns have very conservative town councils. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on whether going through town council politics is necessarily the right way to do it when there's no obvious opening or opportunity. There is actually in our town an opposition party, which isn't a party like party politics, but which is a sort of lefty party politics with more environmental views. They had 2 seats until now. So I'm just wondering kind of where is it best to put one's efforts? Is politics necessarily the way to go, or is it or is it sometimes just best to give that up and go through other types of networks and approaches when the politics of one's area are so entrenched and possibly corrupt, and there are many other barriers that make it challenging.
How interesting. Yeah, I think one should definitely be looking for different ways. And mayors in France have way more power, don't they? And can often be entrenched for many years. Nick Duffel, who again is on my screen, is immediately under you, also lives in France. And so I would have thought running something that's in parallel might well be the pragmatic answer, because it might be impossible. I don't know enough about the workings of what's presumably a different voting system too. I mean, so it's not first past the post as ours is. So the tactics would be different if you wanted to take power. I don't really know enough, but I would have thought, yeah, definitely. And transition towns are quite strong in France, aren't they, as a way of operating? Which, and they always say that they're not political, but I think what they mean is they're not party political. As far as I'm concerned, they're highly political. But
can I just add something as well, or ask a final question on that question, which is that I think somebody else raised the idea that that some parties, those that are more obviously pro-green, would end up being against the Conservative Party, for example, and that we might ourselves be thinking about our chances by looking at it through the prism of the old politics. Whereas it seems to me that what you're describing is looking at the community in quite a different way, as people who are living and working together, who need to get on with each other and have an identity as citizens or people who simply live in the same place. And that's the basis of your appeal, rather than which side they might already be on. And it's that you're appealing to. So for example, if only 20% of people vote regularly in a local politics, that means 80% of people are available for a new approach altogether. And as long as you're not buying into the old left-right divide or whatever, but you're just buying into a whole new idea of politics, you could get any of those 80% on board without ever asking them if they were Tories or whether they were Labour Party people in the first place. Is that how it works, Peter?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's exactly how it works. And those labels are increasingly irrelevant to me. I mean, they've always been irrelevant to me, but that's even more obvious now as we flounder around in failing to deal with this issue, this being Corona. It's like, yeah. So it's that 80% one once, or 98%. It's like we are the 98%. And I don't know why we've allowed ourselves to be subjugated to that tiny minority who are members of political parties. They define they put them, they define the menu, they put the meal on the table, and then we dutifully want to come up and choose it without going, actually, I don't want any of this. And maybe this will help us to become more bolshy. That's my desire.
That's great.
Can I make a quick point? It seems to me the thing that defines what you've done, Peter, in Frome, is the move away from being aligned to parties, so that allegiance is to the people of Frome rather than to party politics. And that surely is the really distinctive feature.
It is. Yes, you're right. In many ways it is, but at this level, a lot of councils would say they're not party political anyway. So there's kind of two bits to it. I mean, they often are. People stand at town level and say they're standing as independents, and then they stand at the next level up as a whatever, as a Labour or Liberal, as a party level. So they, it depends what they're bringing with them. So it's slightly more nuanced than that, but absolutely, it's not it's doing what's right for the town, irrelevant of what manifesto that might connect to. So you might be doing
and what party whip. I mean, the problem so often is that they whatever people want, they are still whipped from above.
Correct. Yeah.
So this is a good point, I think, in which to break out into rooms. In a way, I can't remember the exact words you said, Peter, but I think that feeling of, we want a whole new thing. This is almost like a moment where internally, it's a sensing that the whole thing's not working for us, and it's now beginning to impact upon us in a very personal way. What is the whole new thing? So perhaps take that question now into breakout rooms. Maria's going to do that automatically, and we'll have 20 minutes to just discuss amongst each other. But can I suggest that we all start with, you'll have groups of 4 or so, and just start by introducing yourselves to each other briefly, and then with this open question. And after 20 minutes, we'll come back and share our thoughts with each other, and maybe put a few more questions to Peter for the rest of this evening. So with that, Maria, hit the button. And what I'd like to do now for the remaining sort of quarter of an hour, formal quarter of an hour, let's put it that way, is to hear from some of you, and you can I invite you to say anything that struck you in your conversation, or put a question to Peter, or a challenge to Peter if you like. I'm sure he's up for it. Again, going back to the hands up by clicking on the manage participants screen. So who'd like to either say something or ask another question?
Graham?
Well, I'm happy to ask the question that I was cut off asking when we were in the breakout room, which I was just raising the point about how was it that the United Kingdom managed to achieve what it did achieve in the years immediately after the Second World War, in shifting to all sorts of good stuff happening, all sorts of social democratic, whatever kind of advances taking place. What happened then that we don't seem to be able to repeat now?
Debt and a deliberate effort to win the peace. It was a very specific action that was about winning the peace.
Could we go with the hands, please? Then we can. It's great to have a response, but if we could go with the hands, it would be. We won't end up talking over each other. That'd be great.
Yeah, I should raise my hand like that. Yeah, I just wanted to say, after the wars, it was like you have an educated population, right? They're coming back to live in absolute poverty. The housing was disgusting. The whole all the infrastructure was destroyed. They had to give a social program. There was just no way with an educated population who'd just been fighting and losing people would come back to be like, I'll live in squalor and I won't worry about it. They knew how to fight, right? They were going to bring down any kind of government that wouldn't do that, I would say.
Can we wait for Maria to say which order people speak? Thank you, because we're going to do it in order of hands up. Is that okay? Thanks, Maria. Thank you.
So it's just hard because people raise their hands when they have a question. So does anyone else want to answer to Graham's questions, and then they can raise their hand now?
Maria?
No, it doesn't really seem like it, no. I think the people on the list now have questions, so Paul
Harry's actually
that was
raising
Harry.
his
Harry
hand.
had his hand up, yeah.
Oh, well, Harry?
You're muted, Harry. You're still muted.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I didn't see that. Yeah, the national government during the war, a lot of thought was given to the post-war recovery. So the new towns, for example, the brave new world of the new towns was conceived during the war. The diet that I grew up with as a child was rationing, but everybody had a proper diet, and we were looking locally here at the Dig for Victory, what was being recommended to put in our gardens to grow, and the food intake that we were recommended to have, the amount of calories per day. Those were all wartime driven things that lived until 1953 or 54. And that, for us locally here now, has become quite important, because those of us with gardens are growing stuff for our neighbours. And we're asking, is there a farmer around here with land that we could turn over for market gardening for the long term, not just for now? So I think the thing that brought us together in the last war were a large number of people working out how to survive in the post-war reconstruction. And a lot of the military knowledge that went into the logistics of winning the war was then deployed after the war in surviving. And certainly a lot of the German reconstruction was masterminded by British military genius. And if I was hearing him correctly, the Nightingale Hospital in London was built by a military surgeon who'd built hospitals, field hospitals, in several conflicts over the last 30 years. And it's that level of expertise that ordinarily the politicians don't draw upon. They work in their own silos of incompetence. And what we could perhaps do is bring greater competence to those areas where we fairly obviously can see incompetence. And I think the network that would be great would be to bring together those people who do know what they're talking about.
Could we mute the baby, please?
Oh, sorry.
Lovely sound, but it's slightly blocking the... Yeah, thanks, Harry.
Cool. Well, I'll move on to a new question. So, Paul Arnott.
Hi, very quick one. Came slightly from our discussion where people were worried about the emergency legislation that's come through. But one of the, possibly the only benefit from that is the ability now for councils like Peter's in Frome to legally meet virtually for the first time. The law has changed over the last weekend. You can now be present in a meeting, vote, change policy by doing this via Zoom or Skype. But the question for Peter is that a good thing or a bad thing?
So Paul, I caught all of that until the final bit of your question.
Oh, only to ask you whether you thought it was a good thing for sake of argument, Frome to be able to meet virtually in future under the present legislation. In other words, you can perhaps allow young parents to attend meetings who couldn't otherwise get a babysitter and so on.
Yeah, definitely I do. I mean, you'd have to be careful not to abuse it and have the whole thing open and recorded and revisitable. But that's one of the things I really hope will change. I mean, we tried to live stream meetings in Frome and didn't ever get the technology to work properly. But yeah, I think it'll be great to to have that happening much more and to really build on the experiences of this. Because for many people, meetings at 7:30, you know, you can't get to, especially if they're recorded. You could see them later. You can see who the people who you elected, you know, are and what they're doing. It'd be great. I'd love to see it much more widely used.
Great. Pat Kane?
I'm almost wanting just to pass over to anybody from my group who wants to raise some of the points. Fran, would you like to, are you still around, Fran? Would you like to kind of speak to what we were talking about?
Yeah, I suppose, well, one thing that was raised was, you know, Peter or somebody raised the thing about being pressure from above and how do you sort of knock against it sometimes, especially around planning. And I you know, I remember Peter saying how, you know, they'd raised money sideways. And I think, you know, you could apply that as well. You could possibly raise, as long as you've got the buy-in from people who feel some agency, you know, you could probably raise money, perhaps to get a lawyer to challenge the developers or whatever. So I think it's about being creative, as long as you get that buy-in, that agency from people. And I think here, one of the ways that this situation offers us is to tell stories, is to say to people, yes, you know, you're loving the fact that, you know your neighbors now, and you see the wonderful creative things that people are doing. And does that make you think about what sort of society do you like to live in? Well, actually, this could be a part of that. I mean, I used to be involved in delivering short-term solution-focused therapy, and it's about looking at the vision that you want and then seeing how in the present some of that is actually operational. People often don't realize that, but those elements of the future are happening now, and it's about making that connection between the future and what's happening now.
David?
Yes, okay, so yeah, I think this is sort of a question for Indra, but you don't really have to answer. It's just something that I'm cogitating on, having participated in this event, and it's stimulated by the invitation around the elephant, and it's about paradigms. So I heard at one point someone talking about getting political, you know, taking over the local council, and with a completely new invitation to the sort of that 80% that don't participate, versus coming at it from trying to get a majority of party affiliated people to take over. And in what you're doing, I heard this sort of lovely effort to examine the elephant bit by bit, you know, and as we hold on to different pieces of it. But from the story, the parable, what shifts for everyone is the light coming into the room. And it's only then that everyone who's still holding on to their piece is unable to see the larger whole. And so it's around what is missing, what could be done now around bringing light into this space, approaching it, you know, how we emerge from this, what is perhaps possible now that wasn't before, that is different from just siloing it or coming together the way we normally do.
Right.
So I don't mind saying a couple of words myself about that, and then I'm going to hand back to Peter for any sort of closing thoughts, as we were promising to close formally at 6:30. I'm grappling slightly with the idea that they were blind men and then they saw the light. But apart from that, what I always think is...
No, it's not that they're blind, it's the room is dark.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I'm sorry, I've all this time I've had that wrong, so that's great.
Yeah,
that's
sorry.
great. Okay, no, that's great. That's so much more hopeful. there's some very, very practical things that I'm very aware of, which is that during the last election, politicians were always saying, what the people want is this, or what the people want is that, and each one of these party politicians had a different view of what the people want. They were just projecting onto the people, but there was actually no way of knowing what the people wanted, because the people there's no way to hear the people. And what it seems to me is that what Peter and other Flatpack councils are doing is generating means to hear the people. They're in contact with them, they listen to them, and who knows, maybe sometime soon there'll be digital networks that would allow people to vote and to do things in a remote way, as well as turning up at meetings. And we're building this kind of architecture to capture the will of the people, which we don't have right now, but we're sort of in the process of building it. And I think that the COVID mutual aid networks are playing an important role in that. They're actually digitizing, the public in a very neutral way, not in a consumerist way. So what can we do with that in the future? I think we're busy building that architecture, but I wouldn't want that architecture to be there without the sort of meaning making and trust building that's happening right now in Flatpack. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Peter. Maybe just a few closing remarks, Peter, from you about where you feel it could go from here.
I've got a bit of A4 beside me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things I need to follow up now, which adds to a pile of things. Now, I just feel where it goes is these sorts of discussions, which who knows how far into lockdown and so on we are, but we need to keep having these conversations and the networking and following up with people where they are. Some of these are people I want to talk to afterwards from in this conversation. Or other thoughts that have occurred to me. So, I mean, this is definitely a fantastic, an extraordinary, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to derail the juggernaut of all the things that are driving us towards the cliff. How the hell we stop that from happening, I don't know. But I think we have to keep having these conversations in this kind of a way. And it's just fascinating who's here and in this room. Virtually none of whom I've seen before. That's not, with 3 or 4 exceptions, which is great, because it's sort of like moving outside of the bubbles in which I normally operate. So thank you for organising it and making it happen. And brilliant that this is the start of a series, which hopefully will grow and grow in further conversations.
Great, that's a great finish, and thank you very much. So. We're going to close formally now. I really encourage people to join the Lumio groups where we can further this discussion. So if you go to thealternative.org.uk, you'll see there is actually an elephant section there if you want to join at the system level. But there's also others if you want to talk about democracy, or if you want to talk about telling the story. And some people want to talk about education. There's different groups you can talk to, but as David was asking for, there's also a way to cross-fertilize all of those groups. So it's a moment of slowly integrating and bringing together. And Indra, I see Pat wants to say, yeah. Go.
Yeah, it's just to say to everyone, you're more than welcome, but it would be great if you came through the front door, as it were, which means to sign up as a co-creator. And that's at the very top of the website, www.thealternative.org.uk, and that just gives us a profile of you, what you can bring, how much time that you want to give to us. It's really helpful if you do that, and then we'll actually help you out, suggest some groups that might be appropriate from the way that you've signed in as a co-creator. But try and come through the front door, link at the top of the site, www.thealternative.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.